I'm sure many of you are aware we have Top Echelon Network for our split placements, our big biller applicant tracking system, we have job postings, and then we also have Top Echelon Contracting, which is a full service back office, which means basically we're going to handle all the legal, financial, and administrative details. Recently, we've added 2 new services for Top Echelon Contracting. If you happen to be on our website, you're going to see that we now have a model for the 1099 independent contractor, and we also have an express service, which is very similar to our premium service that we've had for the past 25 years. Our goal, again, is just to make it easy for recruiters to earn money. So today we're going to get started. We have Amy Bingham. She's the president of Bingham Consulting, and the topic is Thinking Ahead, 3 musts to building your firm's value. And I had the pleasure of meeting Amy about 10 years ago, and since then I've heard her speak at a variety of national and state conferences, and she's always focusing on business growth and leadership. She's even spoken for us at the Top Echelon conferences. But Amy is unique in that she's truly what I consider an industry consultant, and she's dedicated to helping recruiting and staffing firms grow their businesses. So basically, she works with owners and the leadership teams to help them evaluate their organization in the terms of people, processes, and technology. She comes up with some recommended improvements for the team, and then she works hand in hand with the owners and leadership team to actually design and implement these new strategies with the goal of having increased growth, revenue, and profit. So, and a lot of times this involves contract staffing. So Amy has 14 years as a VP of sales with Spherion. She also has 20 years just overall in the staffing industry. Today, she's going to be focusing on industry trends, and she's going to be focusing on some of the drivers that you need for long-term success in this industry. And it's really important in today's economy, and especially if you're looking to sell your business. So at the end, if there's time, we may take a few questions. But at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Amy Bingham.
Okay, great. Thank you, Debbie. My gosh, has it been 10 years? Time goes by. Wow. As Debbie said, I've known the Top Echelon group for many, many years, and what a great group this is to work with. I always love to address the Top Echelon community, in part because it's a great group, and in part because I run a small business too, like many of you. And I know the trials and tribulations of starting up from scratch. And I think many of you have probably, maybe you fell into this industry, you were a recruiter somewhere else, and then you decided that, gosh, I can do this on my own, and you hung a shingle outside your house, and before you know it, you had a nice business going. And maybe that business was largely in direct hire, because in the direct hire model, we often see solo practitioners, and they can do, as you know, as y'all know, very, very well. But somewhere along the line, we start saying, gosh, I may not do this forever. I would sure as heck love to have something to sell. And if I want to be able to sell my business, how do I even go about having my business valued? So you may at some point have already had that conversation with someone, and you've learned that really to build value in your firm, you have to be in the contract staffing business. So we're going to talk about why that is. I'm sure if you join this webinar today, that's on your mind, and you may already be dabbling in contract. You may be a pretty mature contract, a blended firm, contract and direct hire. Wherever you are in your journey with your firm, I think you're going to get some value from today's call, because the investment folks will tell you, and the private equity folks will tell you, that you have to be in a contract staffing business, but they don't really tell you much beyond that. Unless you've had your firm valued, you really haven't walked down that path. So I wanted to begin today by really explaining that there is indeed, starting it out by saying there is a roadmap. There is indeed a roadmap to building value in your firm. And a couple of years ago, oh gosh, it was back in 2013, I did a webinar for the American Staffing Association with Al DeBellis. Some of you may be familiar with Al. He's an investment banker, runs some firm out in California, been in the industry for many, many, many years. And he had approached me at that time, and he said, gosh, I know what the drivers are of value, but Amy, you know from your operating experience how to get people there. So let's get together. Long story short, we did a webinar, and he did the what and I did the how. So in that process of that planning, as I was planning for this webinar, I pulled that material out and I said, gosh, these are the 5 drivers, right? Succession plan, service mix, customer base, management and staff, and then the operating model. And that these are all loaded in and of themselves. There's a lot we could talk about. We won't cover too much of this succession plan today, although I will tell you that number 4, management and staff, we will touch on a little bit later in the session, and that is a big piece of it. You have to know, just starting out, you have to know who is it that's going to take over your business if you decide to hand it down within the family. That's one avenue. But if you decide to sell, you want to have somebody or several somebodies on your team that are very strong. So if you're not thinking about succession planning now, you probably want to begin that process, regardless of where you are in your career progression. Okay, we're going to, again, in a short hour, there are 3 things that I want to absolutely convey that are things that you can work on now to build value in your firm. And if, as I move through these, you kind of check those boxes and you say, I'm already doing all of this, great. Then you got validation that you're on the right path. If you're not, then my sincere hope would be that you would take this away and you would say, here are the things I need to act on today to make sure that I have something that I can sell tomorrow or down the road. Must number 1, buyers of staffing firms do not like buying a firm that has most of its business with one company. And I see this all the time. I mean, in my consulting, I run into firms will call me and say, and that's usually why they call me. They'll call me and say, hey, 75, 80%, or even I met one with 95% of its business is with one customer. So obviously the vulnerability there is huge. If something happens with that client, you're essentially out of business. But there are times where a buyer will pick up a firm that has one significant contract. But what happens there is it's very devalued. It's really more of the buyer looks at that as an opportunity to pick up a piece of a supplier that is working with a very highly desired company. But they're going to pay you for just the relationship, just the contract with that firm, and you're not going to get nearly the worth that you're probably valued at. So you have to diversify the portfolio. What does that mean? Starting with service offerings, contract to hire, and direct hire. The standard 3 that you must be in. I've met firms that will only do contract and won't do direct hire, and my message to them is you're missing a significant opportunity to drive your profit, and your customer base is asking you. If they're not now, they will at some point ask you for direct hire. Sometimes we get into a business through contract, and then it bleeds into direct hire, and certainly contract hire is that bridge, that try before you buy, that our customers generally love. So what influences your service offering decisions? The buyer perception, again, of balance. And by buyer, I mean the potential investor or purchasing entity of your firm. Their perception is you're balanced if you're in all 3 businesses. What drives their desire for contract is the stability, the continuity of revenue, the recurring revenue that occurs when you have potentially even long-term contracts for contract labor, where if something changes in the economy, and primarily, we know how most of you on the line are well familiar with direct hire. You know that it's very much a peak and valley business. You can have a tremendous month, and then you can have a blank month, and it's really scary and unsettling. We who run these firms have learned to live with that, and we can do, as solo practitioners, we can do very well. But buyers of staffing firms are frightened by that. They see contract as much more stable, even though contract can absolutely be pulled out from under us too when the economy shifts, but usually it's the first to come back. So if we go into a downturn, for example, and by the way, I hate to say this, but we don't see one ahead, but we are due. We have a downturn historically every 10 years or so. So our last recession was actually technically in 2008. So we're due. So you need to be thinking about beyond just your service offerings, where your vulnerabilities are. We know that companies will stop hiring immediately. They'll pull the plug on any new direct hire business when there's a downturn. Yes, they will let go of contractors. That's the first thing they do. They let your contractors go because they don't want to cut into their full-time headcount. However, as soon as what happens is, if they cut deep into their full-time headcount, as they did in the Great Recession, and there's a lot of work to do, they start layering on contractors very quickly because there is still a lot of work to do, and they don't have the bandwidth, and they again bring in a contractor because they want to plug that hole. So it's the first to come back after headcount is cut in a downturn. So you want to remember that. Direct hire goes away and goes away for quite some time. Contract comes back very, very quickly. So that is the service offering piece. The second would be geographic reach. Local, regional, national. These are big decisions. Do I want to be a local player? Can I work regionally? Can I work nationally? I will tell you that it's much easier now with technology, the enablers of technology, to be able to service companies on a national basis. The question is, do you want to do business in all those states? So that it does pose interesting questions. It's easy to work locally. It's a little bit more challenging to work regionally if you're a small firm, but it can be done. This is really your preference as the owner. This is based on your goals. Do you want to scale your firm? Do you really want to grow this thing, or do you want to stay small? Do you want to be more generalist in the skills that you offer, or do you want to stay very, very tightly niched? And I'd argue that the better, and there's very strong evidence, the more highly niched, the more highly valued, because there are fewer competitors. It's very likely that you do what you do very well, you're expert at it, and you stay in your lane. And buyers do like that. Or there's some other unique attribute of your firm that is attractive. So these are the influencers. It might be, the unique attribute might be where the headquarters is located. It could be the customer base, again, that the buyer finds very attractive. If they want to break into a certain skill segment and you do that very well, those are all going to be attractors. You do get extra credit for multiple offices. The investment folks will tell you when your firm is being valued, if you have multiple locations, that's better than having one. However, in today's world of virtual recruiting, it is possible, and I've seen this work for smaller firms, it's possible to have multiple offices that are recruiting hubs in states or in regions where you may have a major customer. So if you're willing to say, I'm going to go rent space and I'm going to put a recruiter or two in that space without opening a full-blown office because I've got a customer or two in that market, but I know that office could turn into a full-service branch at some point, then that's the way to do that. Okay, that's the way to claim multiple offices. And again, I've seen many small to mid-sized firms, when you look at their website, they've got locations in multiple areas. They have one major hub, but those other locations are really satellite offices. So think about that. You do get the extra credit for multiple locations, and yet it is easier to do that today. Some folks will even put offices in locations they want to build sales in and have the recruiting done from the hub, from the home office. So lots of ways to skin that cat, but you want to be thinking about the attractiveness of more than one location for your firm. So that's geographic reach. Customer base. Small, I want a blend of small, mid-size, and large accounts. And there are a number of reasons for this. But what influences that? Well, I've had people tell me, gosh, there just aren't a lot of enterprise companies in my market, and I'm a local player. Okay, well, if there aren't, there aren't. If you're located in potentially a very rural area, then you're going to have some challenges there. But then maybe you want to think about working regionally or nationally to compensate for that. You really do want a blend. So market composition has a lot to do with that. Ideal customer criteria, where your key customers are located, have a lot to do with that. If your ideal customers happen to be small firms, then that's where your niche is. Then obviously that's going to be an influencer in your customer base. Pricing tolerance also has a lot to do with it. I've had many small firms in contract tell me, I don't want to work VMS. I don't want to work in these low margin environments where I can't be successful. More on that later. There may be a very good reason for you to not work in those large accounts, but you really need to take a good look at them before you say no. So again, balance is what we're after. And in fact, when you look at Top Echelon's customer mix, you can see this validation play out. What I talk to firms about is ideally, for very small firms, 70% of your business, your portfolio is probably going to be in small to mid accounts, or you'll have a mix of 30% of medium. It depends on how you define that mid tier there. But you see Top Echelon it falls very much in that range. 67% of its customers through you all are small firms. And then you've got another, that 33% in the medium to large. That's about right. So a balanced portfolio, again, is what you're looking for. Must number 2, attractive business verticals. This is a big one. Buyers are looking for, they're looking to pick up firms that have, where there is safety, okay? Where there is safety as they look forward. They feel relatively safe that the skills and the industries that the firm they're looking to purchase are going to maintain growth. That demand is going to continue to be high, and that supply, even if it's constrained, as we are today in most verticals, even if the supply is constrained, the firm has a very attractive methodology for reaching those candidates, and that usually involves multifaceted recruiting channels. So must number 2, attractive business verticals. What does that mean? Well, it's industries and skills. Here are the top. Healthcare and IT are always very, very in very high demand. Engineering as well. Accounting and finance to a lesser extent, unless it is a buyer that's established in the A&F space and want to pick up or two in a market, a specific market, that can be very attractive. Human resources. I put niche and micro niche here because niche is better. Again, fewer competitors, more safety for that buyer that you're going to be able to command and maintain margins. And then there's the micro niche. And let me just pause and talk about that for a moment because this is really attractive. I've had customers who have been in the IT space, for example. One in particular was right in Silicon Valley and in IT. I mean, where better to be, right, for IT? But this firm said, you know, we don't want to be a generalist IT firm. We want to pick 2 things that we know. We've done the historical analysis. We know that we're really good in 2 particular facets or buckets of IT. So they changed their strategy completely, which was frightening for the owner, but has paid off nicely for them. So they go to market and they say, we're not even all things IT. We're all things IT in business intelligence, or all things IT in cybersecurity, very hot right now. So that's a micro niche. That's a niche within a niche. Another example would be in the healthcare pharma space, life sciences recruitment. So not just in pharma, but in clinical research slash drug trials. So we staff everything to all things clinical research and drug trials. That's what we do. That's a micro niche. So you want to think about that too. Do you want to, what is it, and I'd ask yourself, what is it that you do really well? And you start there and then you work forward. Now, the influencers on the industries and skills you're in is going to, obviously I talked about supply and demand, and then the outlook for the future. When you have to think like the buyer and say, if I were purchasing my firm, I want to minimize my risk and maximize my investment. So I want safety. So I want fewer competitors is better. Higher margins is obviously better. A blended portfolio is better. And then a strong outlook for the future. No one has a crystal ball, but I will tell you that with healthcare and IT, we know that the aging baby boom community is going to drive demand for healthcare for the foreseeable future. I think I read something the other day. I think it's 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. Well, these folks are getting old. They need health care, and we already see it. So the demand will be strong for health care for the foreseeable future. That creates safety for a buyer, which is why health care is attractive. Technology is always changing. It will always change. The demand for IT skills far outstrips the talent today. And that will continue. So again, those two are in particular, they're very, very attractive, but it doesn't mean the others aren't. So what's your niche? What's your micro niche potentially? And is that attractive now and in the future? That's what you want to ask yourself. Speaking of the future, they're also interested in and very attracted to an owner that is very in tune with, is not just in the trenches running the day-to-day business, but is looking up and looking out on the horizon, stays connected in the industry, attends conferences, looks at data, is very forward-thinking, more risk-embracing than risk-averse, willing to try new things, willing to enter new verticals if he or she sees an opportunity to do that. So more of a forward-thinking, eye on the future owner. And the influencers there are going to be, first of all, the DNA of the owner has a lot to do with it. But the growth, whether we're in a growth mode or we're in a downturn, obviously that's going to influence how the owner is feeling about entering new verticals. The unemployment rate is going to drive, again, some of that thinking we talked about on the previous slide with, is this a skill I can be successful in, or is every order going to be a purple squirrel? If every order is a purple squirrel, then can I be successful? If the unemployment rate is exceptionally low and the skills that I provide, I know I'm going to have to work a lot harder, and the buyer will see that and see that the sales cycle or the recruiting cycle is longer and may be less attracted to that. But nevertheless, someone who has an eye on the future is ready for that, right? As we talked about before, if we're due for a downturn, you want to be thinking about, not hoping for, please don't hope for, but you want to be thinking about what do I need to do if there's a downturn with my business to insulate my business as much as I can. And again, that's contract staffing. That is staying in tune to the industry trends and what will continue to be in high demand, even if the supply is low. Then the skill shortages, obviously, we talked about that already. So those are the influencers in that must number 2. Must number 3, and I alluded to this earlier in the succession planning piece, is having a strong team. I can't say enough about this. Buyers of staffing firms do not want to inherit a team that is going to exit or mentally check out, even if they're on some kind of it's typically a 1 or 2 year earn-out structure where the owner or key players in the firm contractually have to stay for a period of time. But they want to know that the team is very talented and they can inherit that talented team. So it's up to the owner to begin building that team. So the owner has to be, again, the buyer has to see that in the owner of the firm, his or her mentality has been, look, I know how to attract and retain top talent. I know how to do that. My people are very loyal to me. They like it when they see, buyers like it when they see someone who's been with you for years and years and years. You take care of this person. The implication is you take care of your people. They know what they're doing. They're experts at what they do. And if they are impressed as they get to know that talent, even better. So you have to be someone who attracts top talent. It's interesting, we're in the recruiting business, but we all struggle with attracting and retaining top recruiting and sales talent. Everybody struggles with it. So if you can figure that out, good for you. And there are a lot of ways to make sure that you are attracting and retaining top talent. That would be a whole separate webinar. But you have to be someone who thinks that way. And then you have to drive a culture of performance. And this is about metrics management. It's about finding that blend between someone who really just is all about nothing about metrics and is really more of the tough boss, the person you think of as the tough boss that you can't really, the warm fuzzies aren't there. So that's not good, but it's also not good to be the culture of nice, as I call it. And I see both. I see culture of performance, culture of nice, and then the unique owner who's figured out that blend. And those are the most successful firms. So you have to be somebody who isn't just going to let everybody kind of run willy-nilly and there are no metrics in place for performance. And you also have to be somebody who's nice and likable that someone wants to work for. What's going to influence that? Your background, first and foremost. Yeah, again, your DNA, it's not on the slide, but how you're wired, and your industry experience. If your background, if you worked for a firm that held you to metrics and performance expectations, you're more likely to instill those in your culture. So, and if you didn't, that's where keeping your eye on the future and networking at industry conferences and talking to the top echelon folks who are great coaches about what is it that I need to do to drive performance because my business is stalled out. That's probably the number one thing. You're not managing by metrics. You're not holding the feet to the fire, and that's essential in our business. So your background's going to influence that. And then years in the industry, because if you've been in the industry for a number of years, you know that you must manage by metrics and you must have KPIs in place and be almost obsessive about making sure that those things are going to be managed and maintained because it is a production business. Clear accountability. Speaking of production business, this is also a big one. Having very clear best practices in place for your firm, and they're going to look different for your firm. There's definitely some commonalities, but your best practices will be very different from somebody else's best practices. The flavor of your firm, the culture of your firm is going to help drive some of that. But the strong governance on the part of you, the owner, in shaping best practices, making sure that if someone in the organization finds or invents a best practice that reduces our sales cycle or reduces our time to fill, you want to get a hold of that and you want to share that with everybody in the organization, and you want to embed it as a part of your standard operating process. So some of your best ideas will come from your team. Some will come from industry conferences you attend, and that's why it's important for you to stay connected to the industry and talk to people and learn what's working in today's world. And then the strong governance piece, we talked about a little bit before already, is really having a methodology by which you're going to inspect what you expect. So once you decide, here are activity metrics for my recruiters and my sales team, then you have to govern that. So you can assign metrics and just put them out there and then not govern it, and you're probably not going to get very good results. If you put very good SOPs in place for a couple things, for how we recruit here, When I get an order, I do this, 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 and this, and this. That's what I do. And it's science-based, and it is very, very technical. When I get how do I get a job order? Okay, I have to prospect, I have to qualify, I have to set a meeting, I have to do all of these things that are clearly defined for your firm, for your sales team, whether that's you or somebody else. And then manage the metrics. The governance piece is more around how you hold people accountable. That's going to be through one-on-ones, and it's going to be through group team calls, and it's going to be through continuous learning, training, and development to make sure that you're keeping your team's skills sharp and they can meet their metrics and make money, because that's why they're in the business. They're in the business to ultimately, and you're in the business, everybody's in the business to make money. That's why we work. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. So clear accountability is the second driver. Talent development, bench strength. If you don't know who it is that could do what you do, if something happened to you, that should be keeping you up at night. If you want to build value in your firm, someone needs to be appointed, whether they know it yet or not. They probably do know it, or they're going to know it over time. You need to be able to pass the baton to someone who can be you when you're not there. So if you haven't identified that person, if you haven't hired that person, you probably need to look for that person. Again, this is about building value in your firm. So you may be sailing along just fine with you and your team. It may be a very small team, but over time, if you want something to be able to sell, if you are the business and it goes away when you go away, your business can be far less attractive. So someone has to be available or developed to pass the baton to. So you also need bench strength in your recruiting team and your sales team. You don't want to churn and burn those jobs, people in and out of those jobs. First of all, it's very costly. And secondly, if you have that much turnover, there is no consistency in your service delivery. And your numbers probably aren't going to be as good as they would be retaining really good performers over time. All these things, as you can see, are kind of woven together. So the succession planning might be as simple as you putting down on paper, what is it, if you haven't done any of this work yet, what is it that I need to do now, within the next year, within the next 3 years, to make sure that I am setting my firm up for success? And that's a whole project in and of itself. But how do you develop, let's look at the influencers. Let's say you don't have anybody ready today. Who would that person, how would you develop those people? It's going to be through training, and training is never a one and done. It is always continuous. So whether you do leader-led workshops, whether you do online training, whether you send your team to conferences for training, state associations, local events, top echelon events, all of that, all of the above is my answer to that. Especially today's millennials really want to be trained. They want continuous learning. And so we need to make sure we're providing that. Coaching, that's you individually on those one-on-ones with your team. If you see something that isn't going right, you want to be able to correct that behavior, and you're certainly not going to do that with a producer with everyone in the room. You're going to do it one-on-one. So that's why those one-on-ones are really important to have. A lot of folks will schedule those and then they'll cancel them, and they won't reschedule them. And some of you are probably chuckling right now because you've done that. I would say to you, if you have to, you keep those one-on-ones as sacred as you can. If you have to change a one-on-one, that's okay. Please don't cancel it, because the message it sends to your people over time is that they're not important. So put that process in place, the team calls, the one-on-ones, the stand-up meetings in the morning, and then just coupled with training, strong reward and recognition beyond just money. Again, we could have an entire separate webinar on just that. But informal reward and recognition, which is what keeps people really excited about staying with your firm, they are the things that drive talent development for you and create that bench and help you fuel and feed that succession plan. And the final is retention. You want a loyal management team. You want to promote from within wherever possible. Hiring from the outside is always a risk. And I don't want to make a blanket statement that you should never hire from the outside, but it is far more successful in my experience working with hundreds of firms over the years if you can promote a recruiter into a sales role, or you can promote a recruiter into a recruiting manager or practice director role. If you can create visibility for your entry level position to those folks for a career path, and you can develop them the ways we talked about on the previous slide, and they see visibility to moving forward, you'll retain them. It's that simple, A. And B, you know, if you promote somebody, you know their worth, and they know the organization. They know how you go to market, they know your culture, they know you very well. They'll be much better equipped. You'll just have to teach them the new behaviors of the job. You'll still have to train them, but promoting from within, everybody knows what they're getting, and it's just a much, much, much better way to retain talent. You'll end up with this loyal management team, this loyal group that is enviable by the nationals. The national firms, for the most part, don't have that kind of loyalty. And when I work with owners who've been in the market for years and years and years, they have people who've been with them for 15, 20, 30 years since the firm's inception. And when I interview those folks, they say, I would never leave this person. He has been so good to me. And usually they're solid performers, solid contributors, if not top performers, whether they're in management jobs or production jobs. Occasionally that's not the case, but that's rare. So what drives that? The owner, I talked about this earlier, owner has to be a blend of, I'm gonna instill a culture of performance here, we have to perform, but we're gonna have fun too. And if something's going on in your life, I am empathetic to that. I am concerned about you as much as I'm concerned about my business. So when an employee feels that loyalty gets very, very, very strong. And obviously, the second would be very, very good compensation, above market compensation. Again, if these are people you want to retain that are part of your succession plan, you're going to have to pay them. And I bet you all know that. You've already figured that out because you're competing with large firms for talent. So to the degree that your compensation plan is in good shape, that's gonna, to some degree, that's gonna give you a running start, right? It's not all of it, right? Certainly not all of it in retention. It's not all about money by any means. In fact, I'd argue it's more about the owner empathy than anything. But both should be there to retain people. So you do all that, a prospective buyer sees that in your firm, and you just climbed up a couple of notches on their desire scale. That is it. Those are the 3 musts. I gave you a lot of information in, 35 minutes here, so almost 40 minutes. So with that, I would love to turn it back to Debbie and see if there are any questions that have come in.